The Salem Witch Trials were conducted in Salem, Massachusetts between the early spring and September of 1692. Nearly 200 people overall had been accused of practicing the devil's magic. Men, women, and children were accused of witchcraft brought on by possession of a witch. Witches were considered to be followers of Satan who had traded their souls for his assistance. Those who maintained their innocence were more likely to die than those who pled guilty and asked for forgiveness for their crime. The girls afflicted with the supposed witches were motivated by the rights they wanted to gain from constantly reading books of enlightenment like the Bible, which they were forced to read. The girls accused the women of witchcraft in an attempt to gain popularity in the male-driven society. The boys of the household worked in the fields and hunted while the girls stayed home and took care of the house. They were told by sermons that they were tempted by the devil and that women were more likely to sin than men. The girls suffered spells as a way of showing that they need more freedom.
In the 15th century, people believed that the witches gathered to worship their leader, the devil. These meetings were called Sabbaths. In the meetings or gatherings, the witches conducted a service meant to be the opposite of that of a traditional church. For example, Christians used white bread at communion services, and witches were said to use black bread instead. To get to their meetings, witches were said to rub a special lotion all over their bodies that supposedly enabled them to fly. Today, it is believed that most of the well-known stories about these witches were made up by people who wanted to prove that witchcraft was present in their community.
The devil targeted females because they were said to be greedier and not as smart as men. The devil promised to make the females rich, which led to their succumbance to him. The devil could also provide supernatural powers for the women because they supposedly envied the men's physical strength.
Rebecca Nurse was an older lady with a good reputation. She was least suspected by her peers and came from a successful family, but she was resented by other villagers and showed a lack of concern towards the bewitched girls. Sarah Good was another old lady whom no one particularly liked. She was the daughter of a successful innkeeper, but was cheated out of her inheritance by her stepdad. She was married to a derelict and had many children.
Tituba was an Indian servant who saw 4 adults harming children and claimed they forced her to hit them. She also said that the devil told her to hurt the children. She also baked an infamous witch's cake to test for witchcraft. The accused were put through a series of tests in order to prove or disprove their witch identity. For example, the water test was conducted. The accused were thrown into a lake or river while bound to themselves. If they floated away, they were guilty. If they drowned, they were innocent, which resulted in innocent lives lost due to this uprising hysteria. The reason this method was used is because the Puritans believed the water would reject the witch's unholiness by pushing her to the surface. Another test that was used was the devil's mark test, where a pin would be stabbed into an unusual body mark like a mole. If the spot bled and the accused person was showing signs of pain, they were supposedly innocent. The witch hunters, however, found a loophole. They fashioned a retractable pin which was unharmful to the victim, so the spot would not bleed, thus leading the public to believe that the accused was indeed a witch. The most suspicious test conducted was the witch's cake test, in which a sample of the victim's urine was mixed with rye meal and ashes and baked into a cake. The cake was then fed to a dog, which was supposedly associated with the devil, in the hope that the beast would fall under its spell and reveal the name of the guilty sorcerer.
In each of the accused hearings, they were asked to strip in order for the judges to find proof of a devil's mark. Every mole, scar, or even a blemish was pricked while the victim prayed that each would bleed. Another form of proof the judges asked for was a testimony from the villagers. It was said that if a witch were to lose an argument, they would later cast a spell. The villagers would then explain a previous trouble that occurred in their life, such as a sick child or their crops failing, and this would be just enough evidence to find the victim guilty. The last form of proof the judges asked for was another testimony from the villagers, but this time they would need spectral evidence. Spectral evidence was the belief that a spirit or ghost of the victims hurt them.
Once the witch hunts came to an end, there was time for everyone to reflect on what had happened. 19 of the suspects had been hanged and many others imprisoned. Since the victims most of the time had their property taken, they had nearly nothing left. If this wasn't the case, the victims more often than not weren't able to pay their prison bills, so their only way out was to seek help from neighbors or friends. Tituba was one of the suspects that remained in jail. She was held in Boston until a wealthy man heard about the situation and decided to bail her out and take her as his slave. Another consequence of the witch hunt included a food shortage due to the farmers not maintaining their crops. They were so busy attending the hearings, they put off cultivating the property of the suspects. Amongst the accusing girls, reports of Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam are most present. Abigail was a suspicious character even before the trials were held. She was not necessarily liked by the villagers. Many described her as a troublemaker or provocative and a complete liar after the witch trials came to a stop. Abigail craved attention, and that was the best explanation for her accusations. After 1692, she later embarrassed those that believed her claims during the trials by becoming a prostitute in order to obtain even more attention.
On the other hand, Ann Putnam regretted the accusation she had made against the victims. She publicly recognized and apologized for her mistakes, hoping for acceptance. She lived a rather hard life after the witch trials because her parents had died a few years later. Anne was left to take care of her brothers and sisters without much help from anyone. Others besides Anne felt deep remorse for the victims and their families. A judge and almost all of the jurors publicly apologized and were able to grant the families of executed witches or wizards their requests. Although the accusing girls have been compared to mental illness patients with similar symptoms, such as paranoia and insomnia. Most of the time, the patients were only diagnosed with hysterics, but recently, research has suggested that it could have been a neurological disorder all along. The disorder is called anti-NMDAR encephalitis, and it was the cause for the girls' anxiety and delusions. This was also an acceptable explanation for when the girls claimed they could see the witches fly, or for the peculiar fits they would throw in the courtroom.
Over time, the number of witchcraft accusations declined dramatically. Justification for unconventional circumstances became more rational. Instead of blaming everyday misfortunes on supernatural forces, villagers became aware of other causes, such as weather, diet, and their society. Of the accusing girls, only one publicly apologized and recognized her mistakes. Other citizens, such as jurymen, acknowledged their wrongdoings. They said, "We do heartily ask forgiveness of you all, whom we have justly offended."
Evidently, the outlook of the Salem Witch Trials is mostly seen as negative. The executions of innocent villagers and the torture methods of the hunters reflect an obstructive setting. But considering all of the events that happened, this was a learning experience for America as a whole. Those who take supernatural occurrences seriously now can think about other circumstances and not rely so heavily on their spiritual beliefs.